Hello everyone, my name is Jahan, and for those of you who don't already know me, I'm a photographer and an artist. And this video is intended for all those people who've been asking me a lot of questions or basically have been giving me confused looks when I talked about working in the darkroom or printing in the darkroom and stuff like that. So I'm not going to make this very technical, and if you are a pro or something, or an absolute expert and you feel triggered by some of the things that I'm going to say now that might not be 100% scientifically accurate, then just don't be triggered. Okay, so in photography, there's two most widespread processes. One of them is digital photography, and I think I don't need to explain that much. You have your smartphone or your camera and you take a photograph, and you have a sensor and a microprocessor and stuff like that inside the camera. And usually on like a digital camera, you have a screen in the back, and you take a photo and you can see the photo straight away, and that's it. You can upload it to your computer and print it out and stuff like that. With a film camera, it's essentially the same, just that there are a few different things. Now, when you're taking a photo, it's exactly the same process. You still have a lens, like right here, goes onto the camera. Light shines right through it. You take a photograph, and that's the only part where it's different now, is that you have one of these. So this is a 35mm film, and it goes into one of these cameras. What happens is when you take that photo, light shines onto this light-sensitive, photosensitive film, and it kind of stores the image. So you get 36 shots on one of these. Sometimes you get 24, it depends on the film. And they come in different shapes and sizes. You can also get really big films like these. These are large format films, and they work on different cameras. Essentially, what you have to know is that each film has its own characteristics. So some are black and white, some are color, some are sharper, some are finer, some have more grain, some have less grain, stuff like that. And I mean, if you want to know more about all these things, I have a Skillshare page where I talk about that in detail, and I'll post the link at the bottom, or you can swipe up or whatever. Anyways, so back to this now. So what happens is we take a photo and all of it is stored onto here, but we can't have a look at it yet because this is light sensitive. So let's say I would pull out all of this from here, then the entire film would be ruined, and we want to avoid that. So when you're taking photos in your camera, obviously there's only one part of that film that's being exposed. And then as you take a photo, you crank it up like this, and the film moves inside. So you're obviously not taking a photo on always like the same spot because there's a long film inside of here. Okay, so once this is done, we need to process it. And these films get processed in chemicals. Now, usually what you do is you send it off to a lab and they put it into a fancy machine and it's all done. And then what you get at the end of the day, stuff like this, negatives. And these are exactly what you get from one of these films. And they're obviously not light sensitive anymore. And you can have a look at them and inspect them, but they are inverted. So they are actually not what you see with your eyes. They're a complete negative of it. If you are developing your films at home, what you do is you have one of these typically, that's a developing tank. And with a very fancy method and some magic, not really, you spool the film onto one of these spools, and they go inside of here, closes like so. And the cool thing about this is now you can actually pour in liquids through here, but light doesn't come inside. And this is where you develop your films. So what you do is you pour in a developing bath, a developing chemical that develops the film, so that makes the image visible on this. Then you have to pour in a stop bath that stops that whole process from happening, so the image doesn't get overdeveloped. And then you have to pour in a fixing liquid that kind of keeps the film, the image in place, and it doesn't make it light sensitive anymore. So once that's done, you could turn on the light and you can look at your images. So that's what happens. We go through that process, And then we wash the films with water at the end. And then you get these. Or if you're shooting like large format, for example, you get huge negatives. So that's like the comparison. So obviously from these, you get a lot more detail and a lot more data. Now, that process is very similar to exactly what we do in the darkroom. And the darkroom is the next step. So the first time that let's say I go to the lab and I pick up my negatives, this is what I get. But then I have no idea what these could actually look like. So I'll go to the darkroom and I'll actually make prints. So the process is the same. Now bear with me. What happens is, and I'll take you to the darkroom now. I'll show you there actually. I think that's easier. Okay, so now we're in the darkroom, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna use one of these devices, and this is a so-called Enlarger. What we're gonna do is we're gonna take the negative like here, and we're gonna place it inside. And what this does is it projects the image onto the surface. And we can adjust the sharpness and the size by adjusting the height of the projection. So we can, either make smaller photos or bigger photos depending on the height of the actual enlarger. Now, this is where the fancy part starts. This negative will be projected onto light-sensitive paper, just like the film. Now, the difference here is that the paper is not sensitive to red light, and that's why dark rooms always have red lights in them. So if you've watched like Stranger Things and stuff like that, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So we have to figure out the correct exposure time and for the paper, because we have to choose for how long the paper gets projected onto by light. And then we put it through exactly the same chemicals like we're using when we're developing the film. So first we have to develop it, and that's where the image becomes visible for the first time. That's the really cool part about it. And then we got to stop it, and then we got to fix it. And once that's done, we can turn on the lights and inspect the image. Now, what makes this process complicated and why these prints are handmade is because every adjustment we make to the final image needs to happen before we can actually see it. If I want a specific area of the image to be darker, I need to cover that area with my hand, like so, or another tool. To see if I've done it correctly, I need to wait for the print to have been processed. So I actually need to, adjust the image in a way that I think is correct. And then I need to develop it, I need to stop it, I need to fix it, and then I can have a look at the image. So some prints can take really many attempts and sometimes even days of work to complete. And it's not as easy as Photoshop, where you make an adjustment and you straight away see what you've done. And if you don't like it, you just undo it, and that's that. Okay, so and just as a quick run through, this is the photographic paper that I used. And so this is then the final image. That's what we would get from working in the darkroom. And if I give you a quick example, when I did this print, for example, this part right here was way too bright. So what I had to do is I had to cover, I actually had to cover this part and make the light shine right onto here for much longer to get more exposure onto here. So I was actually using my hand on this one, and I was covering the top part so there wouldn't be any light on here, and then this would expose for longer and therefore get darker. And the only way I could see if I did it correctly is after developing, stopping, and fixing. So that's why a darkroom print takes so much time, and that's why it's handmade, because you're actually working with your hands or with tools or whatever. And it's not as simple as using a mouse and a keyboard and stuff like that, which I'm not saying is super simple. Photoshop is difficult, but it's just a different type of way of working. So anyways, I really hope that I could explain a few things for you, and I've made this whole process a lot clearer. And yeah, if you have any more questions, you can always check out my Skillshare page, where I go, where I teach about this in much more detail. Or just, DM me on Instagram, where I'm usually available, and I will try and answer all your questions. And yeah, so thanks for tuning in, and have a nice day. Goodbye.